Hello, everyone, and welcome. You're listening to the 888 Align podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Hanna. I'm a serial entrepreneur who likes to immerse into many facets of life, focusing on growth, mindset, healing, and soul alignment. 8 represents strength, prosperity, balance, power, overcoming, stability, and to me, the yin and yang of life. Pain weaves the gratitude for the beauty in life and appreciation for our generational evolution. You're in the right place if you're looking to dive deeper into finding meaning within yourself and your life experiences, work towards transforming into and aligning with your highest version of yourself, take action steps towards building and creating the life of your dreams, as well as explore discussions on health and wellness, balance, self-care, plus areas like travel, fashion, art, culture, manifestation, entrepreneurship, and even a little spirituality. To be 888 aligned means to be aligning to your strongest and most powerful and enlightened version of yourself. To continue to evolve and always be open to growth while staying true to your core values and individuality. Let's get started with this week's alignment. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to 888 Aligned. Thank you for listening in, and I really appreciate you taking the time to tune in as always. So happy Monday. Ironically, I am someone who prefers Mondays these days, but I think for me in this time of my life, I enjoy them because they are like the fresh restart of the week for me. I'm in this stage of my life where I'm doing a lot of building, so for my businesses and my future, and not really so much partying and going out a lot like I used to, in my earlier 20s. And not working a 9 to 5 allows me to have a different perspective on the week, but I do really believe that it's at this stage that I'm in right now that so many people who are in their 9 to 5s truly misunderstand the most. And honestly, unless you started your own business from scratch, you really will never understand the stage, and that's okay. And a lot of people tend to get defensive over that, but it doesn't really matter. It's mostly their projection. And if you're like me and in this stage, I want you to truly just realize that defending yourself to someone who is inexperienced and makes this type of inexperienced accusation to you, whatever it is really just a waste of time and energy. And that's when you really need to let go of your ego. And I know how hard that can be. We all have an ego, and having an ego does not mean just being arrogant and conceited. Your ego is part of yourself, your sense of self. And sometimes your ego can be hurt just because if someone is trying to tell you something about how you feel in a situation or about your experience when they really can't speak to it, nor maybe they have empathy in that situation, that can hurt. And sometimes we have to just let that go and detach, because you're never really going to win that fight with someone who isn't on the same wavelength as you or really understanding or meeting you on the same page. It's just not a battle worth, in my opinion, your energy to waste all that energy on. But in this stage of life, in a startup or building phase, and bootstrapping yourself is really such a unique experience that only those who do it will understand even what I'm saying right now. But for me, it is really also about finding balance now while also in this building phase, which to a lot of entrepreneurs in this phase sounds like a complete contradiction. However, what I've noticed is that when I was overdoing everything to the extreme, massively type A and burning myself out a lot, I really messed myself up a lot. Whether it was with my physical, mental, emotional, or spiritual health, it was all unbalanced. And while you can hustle and push and accomplish a lot all at once, I realized that you can only last so long doing that until you burn out. And then your burnout can truly last for years, especially if you do not know how to repair it. The burnout that I suffered from doing the hustle culture vibe of pushing myself to the extremes still sometimes hits me. And this is years later of doing that for years, and I am to this day still learning even how to work on this. And as well on that note, a lot of times we can also be hustling and pushing and not paying attention to anything else but this end goal. And then we realize maybe we were so hyper-focused in that we missed the mark on something big, or put the energy into this and got nowhere, or became resentful over what we were working on and suddenly didn't have fun or enjoy it anymore, or even feel passionate about what we once did. I mean, there are really so many things that can happen, and that's why sometimes there are two different kinds of people out there. The people that burn out spinning their wheels really hard and sometimes get nowhere, and the people who have an easier time having things come into alignment for them, and sometimes we may even consider them lucky. And you may even catch yourself saying, wow, that person is so lucky. Like, this always works out for them. With all that, I'm going to start to dive into what today's episode is really about, because it is a deeper episode and I really want to cover this in the best and most helpful way. So what I wanted to talk about in today's episode is shadow work and healing. So let's get into today's episode. Basically, we all have something that we likely need to release. And from that tangent that I went on earlier, part of what I needed to learn to release, amongst other things, is this constant idea of pushing yourself till you reach burnout. For me, and I'm starting with this small example to tie into the rest of the episode, I was kind of brought up around the idea through generations before me and just being in martial arts and training a majority of my life, that if you aren't burned out, that means you aren't working hard enough. And if you aren't working hard enough and you are resting, then you are just lazy and wasting your time, losing your time and your skills. And you're not getting to perfect the thing that you're working on and master it. You're wasting someone else's time and you're also wasting your own money or someone else's money. That is a load and a half of a twisted belief system. But I know that if you grew up around heavy masculine energy that was really imbalanced, that was all about pushing yourself and hustling and never had the other side of this balance of rest, you will also probably relate to this. So clearly I took this and led it into my business ventures when I started out. And frankly, this all started for me way before I started a business, actually. I would purposefully fill up my schedule so much in school, from high school through college, with extracurriculars, sports, and volunteer work, and even also a form of internship, which was instructing and working at the martial arts school that I went to. I filled up my schedule so much and I was so overwhelmed that I barely had a second to catch my breath. And it was all because of this belief system for me. And so with this personal example, I'm going to get into what sits within all of us. I was listening to this Mel Robbins podcast episode, which she is a really great listen when you want to dive into some of these topics. She really poses transformative thought and actions within her episodes, so I do recommend checking her out if you are into those types of podcasts. And she had said in one of her episodes, to paraphrase it in my own take, that we basically all have trauma. And a lot of people tend to associate trauma with something incredibly dangerous, life-threatening, or what typically is thought of as trauma in today's society. You know, the things that have trigger warnings or that are widely spread across social media. There are specific areas and topics when you hear the word trauma, you may think of like assault, abuse, physical trauma to the body, and so on. But she went on to say that trauma is really a part of life in general, and we all have a form of trauma. And I really liked the way she used the explanation to dive into the idea that we all have something to work on. And we often feel as if in our perception and eyes, if we didn't go through something taboo and serious that we aren't used to hearing about, then we are really exempt from trauma. But realistically, it is really, in my eyes as well, part of the human experience to have trauma. We are never going to grow up in a perfect world because that's not how life on planet Earth works. And we aren't going to grow up with a perfect upbringing because the generations before us are always working through their own versions of some sort of trauma. There's trauma interpersonally in relationships, but there's also trauma in life when it comes to finances, the economy, wars, Earth, global warming, the ecosystem, and so much more. There's really so many versions of trauma, and as a result, we have to adapt to whatever is going on when it's going on in our life. The pandemic, in its own sense, is a trauma. I know there are plenty of people that often also have the opposite view of trauma. I've seen plenty of people online and even in person in my life around me get irritated with how much the words are overused in today's society and digitally online, on social media and so on. And there is a consensus that some groups of people feel that these newer generations are growing up weaker because they feel too much and have too much emotions towards things, and they see everything as triggering and traumatic. I've seen this predominantly coming from the older generations, but there are still plenty of people, all ages, that will feel this way. And what I personally perceive from this is their lack of understanding and perception of healing old wounds, and just really being in tune with your emotional sense of self and maybe your feminine energy. And a lot of times they didn't have the tools or access to actually do the work to heal things. In fact, the old methods of trying to help someone going through a depression or what was chemically imbalanced or needed some help with their mental health were, in my opinion, very damaging and destructive. But I, of course, am not a mental health expert or professional. But if you do your own research on learning about what types of therapies there were for those who needed help with their mental health and certain treatments that were introduced and were popular in the 30s, 40s, 50s, and so on, you'll see what I'm talking about and what advancements started from then on. But going back to what I was talking about, when it comes to healing old wounds and generational trauma, a lot of what our parents, grandparents, great-grandparents, and so on go through in their lifetimes carries over to the next generations, and when the trauma is not healed and stopped at that generation. One easy example of this, which is not even about specifically, mental health and emotional health, but ties into it, is thinking back to the Great Depression. And this also can tie into what your subconscious belief system becomes rooted in. When families went through this Great Depression, they obviously had to learn how to deal with money, scarcity, and lack within their life. These types of situations and trauma led to specific mindsets and ways of going about life, where and how they found work and how they dealt with their money and how they allocated their money and what they believed was a waste of money to spend on and what they believed was important, and how they went about their entire life was literally based off of this experience that they had to go through because it's what the world went through at this time, in this time period. And these types of situations and trauma led to these specific mindsets and ways of going about life. And when these are passed down through generations and not changed much, this is an example of how trauma lives on and creates this generational scarcity mindset and lack of money and hardships that until a generation decides to try and stop it and change and heal, it will keep going through the generations. And that's not to say, though, that your parents and their parents and then their parents didn't heal anything either. And I think those that are the ones who are doing the generational healing work in a more massive way are the ones tend to feel they are the only ones who have done any healing. They feel they have the load on them, all of the work and change that has to be done, and they become incredibly resentful towards their parents and generations before them for putting them where they are now. And yes, there are things to blame, and I think there are also things to realize that are not fully to blame. And when you get further along in this journey, if you choose to do some sort of generational healing, you'll realize that perhaps your parents healed a lot actually before from their parents, and what you got from them was their version of leftovers because they did all they could do and they could handle in their lifetime. And that's a perspective that I've realized, and I think other people that I've spoken to have realized when they start doing this type of healing work and trying to transform what is a typical tradition or generational pass along in their lifetime. As you're doing this work and spending this time, you might come to realize that there was changes that were made. It just is now your turn to take on different changes to make. And when there are other people who really don't understand why you appear so emotional and think you are weak for trying to heal your trauma, that's likely because they never had the tools, courage, or ability or awareness to do it. And it's really something you just want to ignore. They are on a different wavelength, frequency, and perception of life. And it's sad, of course, and it's also frustrating because they see the really hard work as weak because their mind perceives emotions and feelings to be weak and actions to be working hard and strength. And again, this ties into my episode of masculine and feminine energy and also flows into how our society, being predicated in this patriarchy, sets us up to not want to do much deep think and healing, but rather just action, action, action. And why there is such an imbalance, in my opinion, when it comes to emotions and healing. Especially when we look at the stereotypes of women in the workplace or of women in positions of power. There tends to be an overall stereotype of men being the ones who want to fight it out and women wanting to peacefully talk it out. Of course, this is not just straight truth, but there is an energetic truth behind the idea of that feminine energy, as relayed from my previous episode, tends to be more in the calm and present energy and working through the emotions and dealing with them and healing, and masculine energy is more about the action. And overpower of either is no good, but the way our world tends to lean, in my opinion, when it comes to political moves and government action is in this more masculine energy. However, there has definitely been more of a push to bring more feminine power into play, but with decades and decades of the same, it will and does take time to change. It is also why I believe that this is just my take, that we have had such a movement to explain and educate on mental health more over the last few decades, because it was not really talked about, because mental pain and physical pain were always held at different standards. And physical pain often being more action-oriented and therefore sometimes more in the masculine energy. And some of you may have had parents or grandparents or just people around you in your family or community who don't understand the pain and the importance of healing your mental health. I know I've witnessed situations around me where there was judgment around being in emotional or mental pain versus if someone was going through something physical, and they often were compared in a way where the physical outweighed the mental and emotional tenfold. And if we look at science behind what our mental health can create for our physical health, though, we can see how much of an impact our mind has on our body. A healthy mind does help foster a healthy body. And when we work to rewire and train our brain to heal and believe in healing itself, it will put the work to do so. It really is amazing when the brain is capable of doing and when we decide to take charge of it. And we can definitely one day get into that into another episode. But with all this, what I really wanted to get into today was what it means to come to awareness of the pain and trauma of something in our lives and dive into it and clear it. And naturally, when something hurts, we want to get away from it. So sometimes doing shadow work feels really unnatural in the beginning. And for those of you who don't know what the term shadow work means, it just means diving into your subconscious mind to discover the parts of you that you tend to hide or suppress, but are also parts where you hold a lot of trauma, triggers, and emotional weight. And also subconscious patterns, which I discussed a bit in the previous episodes, that we were just brought with through our generations of time. And going back to the example of the Great Depression, this lack scarcity mindset is an example that could be passed through you, which you may not even realize yourself. You may have just grown up believing that you will not have a lot of money and it's hard to get money and it's hard to make money and it's hard to be successful, because this could have been a passed through and passed on belief that just stored in your subconscious, and you grew up believing this. And you could easily pass it on if you wanted to, or work to change it. So the word shadow kind of represents the inner darkness or the things that are buried and stored away, like in the shadows of you. And I personally feel that we all have shadow work to do regardless of our stage in life or our mental health. And I think that just growing up as a human on this earth qualifies you to go through some sort of trauma and leaves you with some shadow work that you can work on if you choose to do so. And the reason this type of work is so important is purely for the fact of your own healing to live a better, happier, and more fulfilled and even easier life as well. And on the plus side, when you do this type of work, it ends up clearing the energy behind this for the future generations after you. So how do we do shadow work? What I'm going to walk you through are ways I've researched, practiced, and also learned from other professionals, and will hopefully be helpful and valuable for you. And as always, also seek help with and from professionals as well when you have the ability to. So the first question I would ask is, how do you become aware of something you need to work on? Some people may be very aware of what it is they struggle with or need to work on and what traumas they may have. But others may have no clue until they start doing some digging. I have witnessed both from people around me some incredibly aware of their own triggers and traumas, and some have absolutely no clue, but you can tell based on their reactions that there are triggers present. And these might show up through sadness, anger, and other types of emotional reactions that don't typically show up in a situation unless there was a trigger. Also, of course, there are different kinds of traumas. We have generational, as I've discussed in this episode, that may be less obvious or vary. And then we also have personal traumas that happened in our lifetime through specific events or situations. They may have happened when we were younger and we stored them away and forgot about them, or they may have happened just recently and still maybe haunt us or give us issues in our current stage of life. It's always important to definitely seek therapy to help guide through these traumas and to put the right tools in place to help aid in this work. But as well on the side, and for those who may not have access to therapy right away, here are some helpful things I've done for myself in darker times trying to do some shadow work. First, I want you to think about anything that may make you feel negative, fearful, shameful, sad, down, or an uneasy feeling. Either this will be glaringly obvious to you, or maybe that doesn't come up for you right away. So give it some time. Start observing more of yourself and taking the time to slow down and just watch yourself from a curious perspective, like a third-party perspective. Maybe even meditate on your day or week and try to meditate in a way where you watch yourself as if you were watching yourself in a movie, going through the motions of your day or week. And pay attention to any patterns or themes that continue to show up for you. And this goes with what I've said in previous episodes about feedback loops. Are there any negative loops and patterns or emotions that continue for you? Or was there something specific that happened that randomly caused emotional disturbance for you? An important technique when you come across a feeling you may have had or something that triggers you is to question it rather than push it away and bury it. Sometimes people can't tell when they are triggered. So if this is you, then if you notice you are feeling off with your emotions, sad, all of a sudden, angry, negative, down, whatever it is, start paying attention to that. And if you are someone who really can't tap into their emotions like that, then do some mental check-ins throughout the day and ask yourself, how am I feeling right now? How is my day going? Did I have any physical reactions that felt like something that was from emotional? Like, did my heart start racing, or did my head start hurting, or something like that? Has anything made me feel bothered today or this week or this month? You can set reminders on your phone to do this, or I know there are even mental health apps that help remind you to do these check-ins as well. And these check-ins really help you be more aware of your emotional being more, and you really come into your awareness when something triggers you so you can learn to recognize patterns and do the shadow work. Then, as you start discovering these emotions, I want you, as you may come across these, to stop running and possibly desensitizing to the situation and giving into the patterns. You may even notice your mind may want to skip over them or come up with excuses for them or push them aside or place them away in a tight little box, compartmentalizing them in your brain. For this purpose of doing shadow work, we don't want to compartmentalize. And sometimes doing that is a good technique that could be helpful for us. But if you're actively trying to do shadow work, that's when you want to take these emotions and situations out of that box. And if it becomes too painful, I would absolutely find a mental health professional to speak with again to help you through this process. So when you come to your awareness and actually see the pattern for what it is, you want to look at it from a non-judgmental place. And being non-judgmental with yourself is crucially important here. Judging yourself takes away from the healing process and heightened awareness you can have. After you've discovered something you realize you want to work on, I would start tracing things back to where it all started and why. It's like doing an internal investigation within yourself, like an analysis. This helps you learn more about yourself and become much more aware of yourself and what your triggers are and where they come from. From there, you can go further, like I mentioned, and continue to trace back why this trigger even exists. Whether it be from a specific situation, or something similar happened, your childhood, or your upbringing, and so on. This can sometimes be really helpful to journal with and allows you to free flow with your mind. If you, for instance, notice a pattern within yourself that doesn't feel good, ask, where did you learn this pattern from? Why did you learn to do this or say this? Where did this person or place teach you that and why? Just keep kind of tracing back questions. When you find one answer, question where that came from and then question where that one came from and so on. and you will see more and more answers start to appear. You may even come across where it originated. Sometimes this is a quick answer with a little tracing back, and other times it requires a lot more. You can also try a technique where you just journal dump and start journaling out your thoughts and feelings without a plan and without judgment. And as you continue to write with free flow, you will be surprised with what you may find you are feeling when you give yourself permission to feel and think and say anything. This will allow you to get deeper into your shadow self as well. So what do you do once you've figured out what some of your shadows are? Well, that is only half of it. Then it's time to do the healing part of it. So depending on what the shadow and the trauma is for you will change the type of work you need to do. But once you've discovered what it is, that is when you can do your own research and work with professionals to heal this specifically for you. Every person is going to have their own unique situation and circumstance and level of trauma. Some of these things we can do on our own, and I've definitely done a lot of healing on my own from reading different books and doing a lot of research and just putting a lot of these different systems into place of things I've learned and then practicing them on my own. I've also done other types of therapies that have helped through certain traumas as well. So really using multiple tools to work through shadow work is very important. There's not going to be just one type of answer or one way of doing it. But it's not to say that if you don't have the resources and money to pay for therapy that you can't help and heal yourself, because you absolutely can. You just need to put in the work to do so and really just be a curious person enough so you can learn how to heal yourself and what to research and then what to read. And you just keep doing the research, keep putting the work in. If you are determined to work on healing something, you absolutely can heal yourself. So I never want anyone to feel like if they don't have the money for therapy or to pay for certain resources that they are just doomed or they're stuck to feel horrible, because there are plenty of also free resources out there. There are definitely hotlines out there as well as other things you can research and start putting into practice to start helping yourself. You absolutely can help yourself. So never feel like there is just no way out if you can't pay for it, because there definitely is. So every person is going to have their own unique situation and circumstance and level of trauma. And so the work that needs to be done to dig out the shadows and heal these things will vary. And the idea behind doing the shadow work will free you from these things that cause you pain, suffering, or hardships. And the work behind healing these shadows will bring you peace. And it does feel sometimes like a contradiction, because when you are diving into the things that really hurt you, you don't really feel like you're actually helping yourself, and you may feel more pain from them as you're going through them. But that is just part of the process in the beginning, because your mind is processing what this trauma is, or you start to learn more things about yourself in your life, or you just, if it was one specific situation or incident, it's going to be painful, of course. And that's when it is good to have help from another professional to help you. But the point I'm trying to make here is when you do shadow work, and as I've mentioned a lot of times, we naturally do not want to dive into this. Our subconscious and nervous system wants to protect us. So it will do what it thinks is best for us and try to move past it, skip over it, bury it, make it harder to remember. And there are times where we have definitely benefited from that. But for the purposes of us wanting to do the shadow work, that is why it is okay for us to tell ourselves that we do want to heal this and we want to move on and release this and work with our subconscious to be aware to it and become conscious of it. When it no longer just sits and stores within our subconscious and we become aware to it, that's when we become conscious to it and we bring it to the forefront of us and we can take the next steps to heal and release. All of this shadow work is also important if you feel you want to change something in your life or how it's going, because you may feel stuck. Feeling stuck in our situations often means there is something to dig up, work on, change, heal, or transform. So I hope this episode provided some value for you and tips and ways for you to start working on your shadow work journey. And if you are already on your journey, I hope it provided some other ways you go about it. We all have the power and ability to heal and transform ourselves, and I hope you find happiness within yourself at the end of your work. I know that pain is easy to let build and grow, and I see it as an energy we can choose to let either multiply or pass on to future generations, or we can work to pull it out and clean it out and heal it with love and transform that energy into something bright and beautiful. All right, thank you for listening in and getting into that 888 alignment. Stay tuned for next week's episode. I'll chat with you guys next time. Thanks for listening to the 888 Align podcast. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button if you want to follow along and stay up to date when future episodes drop. You can listen in on Spotify, Apple, or anywhere you listen to podcasts. Follow the podcast on social at 888 Aligned Podcast.